Roger Federer!
My watch is not just a timepiece, it goes everywhere with me.
If you are to bring up the subject of luxury watches, then there's one brand that immediately comes to mind above all others. Rolex is more than just a market leader. As a product, they're a phenomenon and sit at the pinnacle of precision engineering. Synonymous with quality, the devices have a reputation and heritage that no amount of money, spin, or PR stunts could achieve without decades of reputation and brand building. Not only did Rolex write the rulebook on what we commonly wear on our wrists today, they also wrote the rulebook on modern marketing and how such luxury products are sold to us today. However, what is particularly astounding about the company is that they hold this stratospheric position because of the vision of just one man, Hans Wilsdorf, a young entrepreneur, marketing genius, and watch enthusiast who started out his passion for precision watches as an orphan and turned it into a billion-dollar business. Born in Kulmbach, Bavaria, in 1881, Hans comes from a successful middle-class background. The grandson of wealthy grandparents, his mother and father Anna and Johann ran a successful ironmonger business. But there's no tradition of watchmaking to be found in the family history. That begins when Hans revolutionizes the industry some years later. As the middle of 3 children, he began life in relative comfort and with good prospects. Tragically, all this was turned on its head when his mother died in 1892, followed shortly afterward by his father's death the following year. As all 3 children now find themselves orphans, their upbringing is put into the hands of their uncles. They decided it is in their best interest to sell the family business and use the money to secure a good education for all 3. Hans is now sent to the prestigious Ernestinum boarding school in Coburg, an elite school whose history stretches back to its foundation in 1524. Sadly, his time there is not a happy one. Perhaps seen as lower down the social ladder than many of the boys attending, or perhaps seen as unusual due to his Protestant upbringing, he is taunted and isolated by the other boys. To compensate for this, he throws himself into his schoolwork and excels at mathematics and languages, particularly English and French. By good fortune, this proficiency in languages will soon provide the keys to opening the doors of his empire. Despite these initial difficulties, Hans looks back on this part of his life with typical pragmatism. In fact, he sees this period as key to his future success. He quotes, "Our uncles were not indifferent to our fate. Nevertheless, the way in which they made me become self-reliant very early in life made me acquire the habit of looking after my possessions. And looking back, I believe that it is to this that much of my success is due." One other key turning point in Hans' early life comes when he befriends another young boy from Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, famous for its watchmaking industries. It's here while swapping stories with his friend that his fascination begins. After schooling, now age 19, Hans begins an apprenticeship with an international pearl exporting company. His skill with languages sees him become a valued employee, where his job is to package and grade pearls for sale to jewelers. With these newfound connections to the jewelry industry, his ambitions begin to take on new light. He also notes that his employers aren't actually creating anything, but are still making huge profits. In 1900, Hans received a letter from a friend offering a job at Cuno-Corten in Chaux-de-Fonds. Here his mastery of languages is put to use again, and he's employed as an office clerk, negotiating with customers in the UK and US that the company exports to. Another part of his job is to wind hundreds of pocket watches every day and verify their accuracy. It's here that he picks up a tremendous insight into how watches work and are made. After brief military service with the German army, Hans decides on a move to London where he will meet the future business partner that helps him see his dreams become a reality. In 1903, Hans was once again working for a watchmaking company in London. During this time, he meets his wife Florence May Crotty, and via her, he meets his future brother-in-law and business partner Alfred Davis. At this time in history, wristwatches are not in common use and are greatly favored over by the traditional pocket watch. Wristwatches are generally only worn by women, primarily as items of jewelry, and known as wristlet watches, which in itself has feminine overtones. But Hans, whilst working his trade as a watchmaker, sees pocket watches as cumbersome and difficult to access. He constantly has to go into his waistcoat pocket to check the time and put it back there again. There has to be a more efficient way. At the time, it was thought impossible to make a wristwatch that would match the precision of a pocket watch. Rather than be put off by this, Hans actually sees it to his benefit, an opportunity to fill a huge hole in the market. He knew the solution lay in the fact that a wristwatch would have to be robust as well as accurate. If a watch were to be worn on the wrist, it would be exposed to water, perspiration, dust, and hard knocks. And it was within this clear insight that the future of Rolex lay. He's eventually quoted as declaring, It is my opinion that pocket watches will almost completely disappear, and that wristwatches will replace them definitively. And as we now know, he was absolutely right. In 1905, he approached Alfred Davis for support and asked him to act as a co-investor in his vision. Alfred's so impressed by Hans' passion, he agrees to put up a substantial amount of money to support him. And so Wilsdorf and Davis Limited is founded when Hans was just 24 years old. Initially, the company imports the watch movements from renowned Swiss maker Hermann Egler's to England and places them in quality British-made watch cases made by Dennison and others. At first, they actually aimed to sell timepieces at affordable prices, which is in stark contrast to where we find the company today. The earliest watches from Wilsdorf and Davis were usually hallmarked W&D inside the case back. On the 1st of July 1907, Wilsdorf and Davis established a branch in Chaux-de-Fonds, strengthening their connections to Switzerland. Again, Hans' versatility with languages proves to be vital, as the region mainly speaks Swiss French. By 1908, they're already one of the top wristwatch manufacturers in England. But fate and global politics are soon to force Hans Wilsdorf to seek a new identity for his brand, and it will be the change that ushers in his continuing and indefinite legacy. The outbreak of World War I with Germany sees Hans decide to remove his obviously Germanic name from his brand and invent a new one. And so, Rolex is born, and Hans commits his efforts to create the perfect watch, rebranding as Rolex. The name Rolex seems almost perfect for a watch. It feels high-class, catchy, and easy to say, which is exactly what its creator was aiming for. You may be surprised to know it's a word invented entirely by Hans Wilsdorf. More importantly, Hans needed the word to be short, so it could be easily seen on the dial of his watches. Some say it's inspired by the French phrase horlogerie exquise, which translates as horological excellence. Horology is the science of measuring time. Others say Rolex is the sound a watch makes when you wind it, or that the word is symmetrical and looks good on the watch faces. The mystery deepens even further if we're to consider Hans' own account of how he arrived at this iconic moniker. He says in his biography, "I tried combining the letters of the alphabet in every possible way. This gave me some hundreds of names, but none of them felt quite right. One morning, while riding on the upper deck of a horse-drawn omnibus in London, a genie whispered 'Rolex' in my ear." In 1914, with the outbreak of war, the British government imposed heavy taxes on all companies exporting goods across international borders. With this and further tensions over his German heritage, Hans decided to move the company to Switzerland. In 1915, he switched the company name from Wilsdorf and Davis Limited to the Rolex Watch Corporation Limited. Now Hans goes all in with his team in Geneva to create the ultimate wristwatch. He states his mission goal by saying, "We must succeed in making a watch case so tight that our movements will be permanently guaranteed against damage caused by dust, perspiration, water, heat, and cold. Only then will the perfect accuracy of the Rolex watch be secured." And in 1926, he eventually released a new watch, the Rolex Oyster, that changed everything. With it, he creates the world's first waterproof wristwatch. It has a hermetically sealed case that is so tightly closed no air can leave or enter it. The process of hermetic sealing was named after the Greek god Hermes. But Hans, as a visionary entrepreneur, knows that technological advancement isn't the only thing that can make his watch a success. And so, to promote Rolex, he single-handedly invents modern marketing and sports sponsorship as we see it almost everywhere today. Seeing corporate brands or luxury items being endorsed by athletes and celebrities seems commonplace today. It's even created the influencer phenomenon you can find here on YouTube. But Hans Wilsdorf was the man who started much of this type of advertising, and he knew the perfect type of events to attach his watches to. Events of endurance and feats of remarkable human achievement. His publicity stunts not only made people aware of the brand, but they also demonstrated the Rolex watch's durability and capabilities. In 1927, British professional swimmer Mercedes Gleitze publicly announced that she's going to be the first woman to swim the channel between Britain and France. At the time, many believed this to be impossible for a woman, and so the attempt gathers a massive amount of public interest. Wilsdorf approaches Gleitze, offering sponsorship in return for her wearing his new waterproof Rolex Oyster during her attempt. Thanks to freezing weather, and after 15 hours in the corrosive seawater, Gleitze sadly has to abandon her attempt. But on arrival back on land, her Rolex is still working perfectly. He follows the achievement by taking out a full-page advert in the Daily Mail reporting on the event. The Mail is, as was then, the United Kingdom's biggest-selling newspaper. Rolex now capitalizes on the watch's reputation by having them placed in fish tanks, with real fish in them, in jewelry stores across Europe. The watch becomes a sensation. Realizing the genius of this strategy, Wilsdorf soon begins attaching himself to other major sporting and engineering achievements now famous in the history of mankind. In 1933, the first planes to fly at high altitude over Mount Everest took place. Of course, all the pilots are wearing Rolex, so now we know it works in freezing temperatures with little air as well. 1935 sees British driver Malcolm Campbell at the wheel of his last customized Bluebird car. He becomes the first driver to travel over 300 miles per hour, breaking his own land speed record for the 9th time in the process. Campbell's so impressed by Rolex that he agrees to wear one without charging a fee. Perhaps one great engineer appreciates the work of another. Rolex has been attached to several of our most outstanding achievements. In 1953, when Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay first conquered Mount Everest, they both wore Rolexes. And going from the top of the world, Rolex next went to the bottom. In 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh piloted the Trieste submarine on its plunge to the deepest point on Earth. A 10,916 meters, 35,800 feet depression called the Challenger Deep. It took a whole 9 hours for the submarine to reach these incredible depths. Not missing the opportunity, Rolex had a special watch created and attached it to the exterior of the submarine. They called the watch the Deep Sea Special. It survived the incredible sea pressures. Happy to announce that your watch works as well at 11,000 meters as it does on the surface. Another stunning achievement for the brand. By now, Rolex was now being worn in movies such as the James Bond franchise and by stars such as Marlon Brando and Paul Newman. Even the Pope, Fidel Castro, and the Dalai Lama have been pictured wearing them. Throughout the 80s, Rolex capitalized on the brand's desirability and invested heavily toward presenting them as the ultimate luxury item. They signed sponsorship deals with the elite sports such as golf, equestrianism, and yachting. The name was now highly visible alongside perceived privilege. From here on, their watches become an object of desire over utility. These marketing strategies have only seen Rolex go from strength to strength over the decades. It allows Rolex to sell their brand at luxury prices, which in turn allows them to maintain premium quality and continue improving the model, which further builds their reputation, thus further enforcing them as a status symbol. This takes us right back to them being able to charge premium rates. It is a self-fulfilling cycle. Over the years of their rise to prominence, Rolex achieved several firsts that would become the standards and features of how we find modern watches today. In 1931, they launched what may be considered their greatest achievement of engineering. The Rolex Oyster Perpetual is the world's first ever self-winding wristwatch, a mechanism that watchmakers had been trying to perfect for centuries but failed. The machinery consists of a rotor or oscillator that's powered by the movement of the wrist and winds the mainspring inside the barrel. These watches are more accurate due to the removal of human error that can occur in winding. It's a highly innovative system now found in most quality watches. 1945 saw the launch of the Rolex Datejust, the first waterproof self-winding watch to feature the date of the month on the clock face. In 1954 saw the launch of one of their most iconic designs, the Rolex Submariner. It was the first watch to be waterproof up to 100 meters. Today, the Rolex Submariner is considered a classic among wristwatches. 1955 brought us the Rolex Day-Date, the first watch to ever feature the date of the month and the day of the week on its face. In 1956, Rolex introduced the Milgauss, a watch especially resistant to magnetization. If you're lucky to find an original, one vintage Rolex Milgauss marked by Tiffany & Co. famously fetched $32,000 at auction. And that is a feature that makes Rolex so desirable. They maintain and increase their worth with rarity and age. The watches are as much an investment as they are a luxury. Today, the most expensive Rolex on the market is the Rolex GMT Master 2 Ice, with prices starting from a cool $485,350. But that price is nothing compared to the amount that the most expensive collectible Rolex was ever sold for. A Rolex watch originally owned by actor Paul Newman and now known as the Paul Newman Daytona is the single most expensive Rolex ever sold. It was purchased for $17.8 million during an auction in October 2017. Although Rolex continues to dominate as a business today, Hans Wilsdorf actually stepped back from being the main face of the company not long after the death of his wife, Florence Wilsdorf-Crotty. As they had no children, in 1945, Wilsdorf established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation in memory of his beloved. In 1960, just months before he passed on, he gave his 100% ownership stake in Rolex to the foundation. The Hans Wilsdorf Foundation owns and controls Rolex to this day and donates much of its income to charity and social causes in Switzerland. As they are a charity, there's no requirement to disclose financial or charitable donations under law, and the company pays no corporate taxes as a result of being owned by the foundation. Today, Rolex watches are not only more popular than ever, they're also now harder to obtain due to a combination of factors. In many cases, Rolex fans must place their name on a waitlist to purchase one of these exquisite timepieces. These waitlists can last several years, and often they aren't based on chronological order. The desirability of these timepieces was gained through Hans Wilsdorf's ability to play the long game and see a wide picture of potential realized over decades. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to share it with a friend and have a nice day.